Ryan Reynolds here for, I guess, my 100th Mint commercial. No, don't. I mean, honestly, when I started this, I thought I only have to do like 4 of these. I mean, it's unlimited premium wireless for $15 a month. How are there still people paying 2 or 3 times that much? I'm sorry, I shouldn't be victim blaming here. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/save. Whenever you're ready.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
We never had problems with bedtime resistance, but boy, she just couldn't calm that active brain down. And it would go fun places, ideas, questions, thoughts, ideas for the story she wanted to write tomorrow. But it would also, at times go into not great places. So a little rumination and spinning about something she saw, some social dynamic on the playground that wasn't great or whatever. And that would prolong bedtime just because she couldn't calm down. You have to have strategies for that in terms of setting limits and really teaching them deep breathing, mindfulness, how to have activities where I say, put the thoughts away for the day. You actually say, these are all great. We're going to talk about them tomorrow. Let's write them on a slip of paper. We'll talk about them tomorrow.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. When my child was little, one of the most common sleep training methods was the cry it out approach. We tried it briefly, and it felt absolutely terrible for all of us. I know that many of you guys out there can relate to the feelings of desperation and overwhelm that come when a child just is not sleeping. I wish I'd known back then about sleep coaches Macall Gordon and Kim West, Kim is also known as the Sleep Lady, who've developed a gentler, effective approach to changing sleep patterns. Their approach, which is based on years of research and experience with thousands of families, is especially suited for children who are more alert, intense, and persistent than their peers, and who put up a bigger fight at bedtime. Sound familiar? Then this episode is definitely for you. In their new book, Why Won't You Sleep? A Game-Changing Approach for Nonstop, Super Alert, Big Feeling Kids, Kim and Macall present a fresh take on sleep training rooted in understanding a child's unique temperament. In our conversation, we cover those common sleep struggles, misconceptions about sleep training, and why a gradual approach is empowering for both parents and children. They also share tips on setting limits for early risers and managing transitions that encourage peaceful nights. A little bit about today's guest. Macall Gordon, a researcher and certified gentle sleep coach, specializes in the link between temperament and sleep and has an MA in applied psychology. She's also a featured provider on the women's telehealth platform Maven Clinic. Kim West, aka the Sleep Lady, has helped over 20,000 families worldwide gently teach their children to fall asleep without tears. With over 25 years of experience as a child and family social worker, Kim has appeared as a child sleep expert on shows like Dr. Phil, Today, and Good Morning America. If you are the parent of a child who struggles to fall or stay asleep, I hope you find comfort and practical tips in this episode that lead to more restful nights. Here is my conversation with Macall and Kim. Hey, Kim and Macall, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, as always, I'm looking forward to this conversation. I feel like I say that at the beginning of every episode, but I really am. This is another topic that is just such an issue for all parents, but especially parents who are listening to this show, because we're going to be talking about sleep, lack of sleep, or all the impacts of challenging sleep on our lives. So I've read your formal bios, but because I have the honor of having both of you on the show, co-authors of this new book, Why Won't You Sleep? And also you're both experts in this space. Would you take a few minutes and do a little personal introduction for yourselves? Kim, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. I am a mother of 2 daughters who are grown young adults now. And I am a clinical social worker for, my goodness, 32 years. Can't even believe I could say that. And 30 years ago, when I had my first baby, was when I developed what I call a gentle approach to sleep coaching, because I really wanted to not leave my baby to cry it out alone or cry herself out alone. And so I did that and became known as the sleep lady and have written several books on using this gentle approach. And then 14 years ago, I started training gentle sleep coaches to use this gentle approach all over the world. And that's how we then transition to the wonderful Macall, who came into my life.
Yeah, I think the super cool thing is Kim and I were moms right about the same time, having almost the exact same struggle. And we took different paths. Kim tried to solve the problem and I just suffered through it. So at the time it was cry it out or nothing. And I knew I couldn't do it, but I didn't have an alternative or didn't have the presence of mind to think of an alternative. And so I just slogged on through and was perplexed by all of the stuff I would read. Because at the time, that was really at the super duper beginning of the internet. So that wasn't really a thing. So it was books and magazines. And all the books and magazines were basically saying, just cry it out. That's what you have. And I was just perplexed by it, the whole tone of it. And so I ended up going to graduate school to get a master's degree in applied psychology, where I only focused on this question of what do we know about sleep training and what do we know about sleep training for more intense kids? Because I had had 2 of them and the stuff just didn't track. So after getting my master's degree in teaching research for a bit, I was like, maybe I should use this knowledge to help parents with sleep. And I kind of cast around looking for different training programs. And that's how I found Kim and chose that program because it was the most balanced, but also really looked at the whole picture. It wasn't just like, okay, we're going to get in and give you 2 weeks of information on sleep training on this method. It was like really intense, and I like intense. So I went that way.
Well, the apples don't fall far from the tree then.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Right.
Topic of temperament.
Yes. I can't remember the name of the book, but I'll say so. My kiddo is 20, and there was a book, someone who, funnily enough, did not have children, but was sure that this was the book I needed to read. And it was a sleep training book. And I was like, great, because it resonated with me in that, yeah, I'm going to have this child who self-soothes. And I kind of dictated who this child would be. And of course, that is not the kid that I got. For me, it was either do that or have your kid like there was nothing in between that I knew of. And even though it didn't feel right to me at the time, I just felt like I didn't have any other options. Could we even just define what sleep training is, just so we're all on the same page? What is sleep training?
That's a big question, because I think, and I think Kim's got lots to say as well on this, but from my perspective, it's kind of gotten equated with, and it's kind of a bad term for a lot of people. It's equated with crying it out, right? It's like, because everybody thinks that's the only way and that's the only strategy. But to me, sleep training, it's a funky term, admittedly, is all about transferring the work of going to sleep and back to sleep from the parent to the child in whatever pace people pick. Fast, drastic, incredibly slow, somewhere in the middle. But to me, that's what the work is. I don't know if out in the world, that's how people understand it.
Yeah, I sort of think about it as helping our child learn the skill of putting themselves to sleep so that they can then apply it to learning how to go back to sleep, whether it's in the middle of the night or naps. And then what age is appropriate is a whole separate conversation. And whether you stay and offer physical and verbal reassurance, which I'm more pro about, or whether you leave them to figure it out on their own.
I think the way too that Kim's stuff is so new and refreshing and different is because all of the sleep training stuff is absolutely dictated and grounded in behaviorism that we do not use in any other aspect of child rearing. We have ditched behaviorism as a model for working with our children, except in sleep. And under behaviorism, the old thing of whatever you reward persists. And if you take the reward away, that behavior goes away. We don't use that anywhere else. And in that model, parental help is cast as a problem, as something that perpetuates the behavior, rather than the thing I adore about Kim's method is that instead we're scaffolding those skills. I tell parents it's like teaching them to ride a bike. You don't just give a kid a bike and walk away and go, good luck with that, kid. I'll be over here, right? You help them. And so when we tell parents about this process, it's consistent with their way of teaching their kids everything else. It's not this weird anomaly where they have to steel themselves and grit their teeth and get through it and, you know, be outside in the hallway crying themselves because it's so horrible. We don't need that. It's not necessary.
And it isn't even logical. To me, I never thought it made any sense. So my child is learning a new skill by literally crying themselves to sleep, not understanding why. I always like to use this example that if you, let's say, rocked your baby to sleep for 8 months and all of a sudden you're like, my back hurts, this isn't working. The minute I put them down, they wake up, I have to re-rock them. And you decide as the parent, I'm changing it, and you're going to put them down awake. Well, of course the baby's going to cry. It's not their fault that the only way they know to put themselves to sleep is to be rocked to sleep, and they don't understand why you've changed. I always think of it as I felt the same way. I remember when I was in internships and, with social work school, when working with little kids, the whole concept of timeout never really made sense to me either. So the kid has an incredible temper tantrum and you're sort of punishing them by having them go, sometimes shaming in some cases, having them sit in a corner in a chair. And I was always like, okay, so what if they don't stay in the chair? This was before I was a mom. And what are they actually learning about their feelings and how to manage their feelings? And so that kind of I thought of the same thing with sleep. I feel like it's my job as a parent to help model and teach, I hate to use this overused word, self-regulation. What do we do with our big feelings and even our small feelings with our children?
It's interesting when you think about it that way, especially with such a little one, right? That for some reason around the area of sleep, we have this idea that, well, they need to be able to learn how to do this at a very young age. And I was just thinking about when you have a child, a little one who isn't sleeping, it's like a quality of life issue for the parents, right? You can feel really desperate and this is not sustainable. And there's also the measurement against other parents and what other kids are doing. So I feel like the stakes around sleep in particular are so high, but it doesn't make sense that we would have this kind of behavioralist approach to sleeping when we're talking about such little children.
This is my big soapbox issue on the current sleep training situation. There's no caveats for limits, right? It's just nope, however much crying at whatever ages, it's all good. Right. And Kim's got a couple of horrible stories of people who were like, well, we just kept going and my baby cried for 2 hours every night or more. There's no limit about when it would be good to use it. How much is too much? For what children is it too much? Right. That's where we really get into temperament and neurodiversity. How much crying is too much for a particular child at a particular age? Right.
And parents are being told oh, there's a new study that shows that it doesn't cause any emotional damage.
Yeah, it's one of those, you really have to meet research where it is. And that means you have to look at how those questions were asked. With research, it all depends on how you ask the question and how you choose to measure the outcome. Now, I should say, and I know, Kim, we are so on the same page with this. We're not saying that using Ferber or whatever causes some emotional damage. That's not true either. What we're missing is nuance, and we're missing a better assessment, again, by age, by temperament. So the way that they've measured emotional effects or side effects is a little bonkers. There was one study that said, there was no long-term effects on attachment, which I don't think there would be, but let's just take this as an example. They assessed attachment not with the strange situation, which is the usual way, gold standard. They did a 5-question scale that measured something called disinhibited attachment. I was like, what's that? I looked it up, and it's the kind of attachment style that you'll see in like children from orphanages with severe neglect, where they'll indiscriminately run up to a stranger and say, take me home or something. So the idea is, since kids who went through crying it out didn't have this crazy severe level of attachment disruption, they said it didn't affect attachment. It doesn't make sense. Or they measure it with just measures that aren't really a thing. Now, lots of them have used good measures. There's no behavioral issues on the child behavior checklist. There's a lot of different things, but some of them that are used, we don't even know how much crying there was. So it's like, well, how much crying was without effect? Was it without effect for every child in that study? What about that one over there who cried for 3 hours? What were the effects for that kid? But we don't know, because it all gets collapsed into averages.
Yeah. And I do want to say, because that jumped out at me, you talk about attachment in the book. And one of the other things that you say, which I just want to reiterate because it could be comforting for listeners who maybe have let their child cry it out here or there, that what you're not saying is that doing that a couple of times is going to result in an attachment disorder. Because I think so many parents also carry guilt or shame about having made some of those choices. So that's not what you're saying.
Not at all. Attachment is a big construct. It's a big thing that takes time. I think in the book we say it's not that fragile. It's not like you can do one thing and ruin attachment. Attachment is built over time, over a pattern of responses. So absolutely no. If I were going to look for side effects, I wouldn't be looking at attachment personally.
Okay, that's super helpful. Let's take a quick break and then we'll get into your new book, Why Won't You Sleep?
Blinds.com is kicking off the savings early with Black Friday mega deals all month long. A Blinds.com design expert can help you make the perfect selection on your schedule. We can even handle everything from measure to your whole home installed for just one low cost. With over 25 million windows covered, Blinds.com is the #1 online retailer of custom window coverings. Save up to 45% on select styles, plus a free professional measure right now at Blinds.com. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Making everyone happy on vacation isn't easy, but you know what is? Going to Aruba. All you have to do is walk out your door to find pristine pools, relaxing white sand beaches, and an island teeming with outdoor activities that'll put a smile on any face. You won't just feel great, you'll all feel great, filled with a calmer, more peaceful vibe that radiates Aruba's warmth. And the best part is, it never fades. That's the Aruba effect. Plan your family trip at Aruba.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger for thousands of appetizing ingredients that inspire countless mouthwatering meals. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices. Plus, extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week and up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with points. So you can get big flavors and big savings. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
All right. So you have a new book that is just out. It's called Why Won't You Sleep? A Game-Changing Approach for Exhausted Parents of Nonstop, Super Alert, Big Feeling Kids. And I really love that subtitle. And I want to know more about it. Who did you write this for, and why were those the adjectives that you used to describe the children?
I think we wrote it for our past selves, right?
So Macall and I both have what I used to call alert kids and what Macall likes to call live wires. You feel like both your kids are, right?
Yeah, 2 different kinds, right? I have one that's sort of, I call them innies and outies. So it kind of more like introvert, extrovert types. So both intense, they just take it in a different direction and had really different sleep styles as well, both of them. So I had it coming and going with those 2. What I was seeing, and again, it comes deeply from both of our experiences, that the usual people who decided, like you said, Debbie, that, okay, I have to do it. I have to sleep train because I'm dying here. And they found that their experience was not at all what the book said. Not at all. It was not 30 minutes of crying. It was hours over many nights. And the books never talk about that. And so these parents were really just stuck. I mean, either they weren't trying it at all, like I did, or they tried it and it was just a dumpster fire and they were just stuck. So I like to say that the sleep wars that they talk about, crying it out versus co-sleeping, it's all fought by people for whom that worked. Then there's all these people in the middle who are just struggling because neither side worked for them. And so this is really who we wrote the book for, is to really take some sleep information and tailor it for people with these alert, sensitive, persistent children who are curveballs for sure.
Yeah. And who we really felt need to have a gentler approach. These kids need more help and support in kind of down regulating, and I always like to say rewrapping themselves, emotionally. They really need their parents or their caretakers' support. And so that's why we wrote this book.
Yeah. And I did do some research on temperament and sleep. And, what we thought would be the case really definitely was that it wasn't for lack of trying that these parents were struggling. The parents of more intense, sensitive kids had tried a higher number of strategies with less success. So they had really done the work and stuff just wasn't working because really except for Kim's approach, really all the stuff out there, it's still that one thing. And you're like, well, great. If that doesn't work, what else have you got? And so it's been great to say, we have something for you.
Would you walk us through the broad strokes of Kim's approach so we can understand what makes it different from other methods that are out there and why it can work so well for these more intense kids?
Well, I think, again, the game-changing part of this is that you get to stay with your child at first. And then we just gradually move you away, which really works across the board. It really works for toddlers and it really works for babies, but it works on up. You say, okay, we're going to do something new, but I'm going to be here for you and I'm going to help you. And then we gradually move that parent away and out, but it's gradually over the course of, I'd say, a couple of weeks.
As also the parent is doing less and less to offer support. So whether it's through their voice or touch. The idea is that, I'm going to be there to support you while you learn this skill, and I'm going to do less and less and sort of pass the baton to you, right? Until you've internalized the skill yourself. And it ends up being so empowering for the parent because not only are they able to be more consistent because they're there, but they're learning about their child and themselves, I would add, and they are seeing their child learn a new skill, which is so often the parents say, I can't believe it. Like they started rubbing the sheet or humming or rocking their body, or they actually can do it because these parents have given up hope. They feel like something is broken and their child will never be able to do this.
I think the other piece, the parent side of this, is so many of these parents just feel like they've been steamrolled by this big, powerful child, and they have been, and they feel like they can't have an impact. I can't set a limit because it just blows up in my face. And so the exciting thing is that parents can say, no, we're going to sleep in the crib tonight. And when it actually starts working, it gives the parent a little feeling of, oh, okay, I can set a limit. I can have something actually happen here. And that's hugely powerful because I say, look, with these kids, you cannot just follow their cues. I joke around and say, I followed my kids' cues right off a cliff. Like it was not good. I didn't feel like I could set a limit because the cost was so high with them, right? They would freak out. And I was so tired. So this whole process works on both sides of the equation in a supportive way. So there's so many parents where I have to encourage them to set these limits. And Kim would say the same thing. You have to say, no, it is okay to ask your child to learn something new so that you can be a functional parent. And it's just a slightly different way of saying the same things, but in a way that makes sense for this group.
I think of it really as scaffolding, right? So we're always talking about scaffolding when we're learning any new skill. And our job as parents of these kids is to be attuned to them, to understand when they need more support, to look for windows of opportunity when they might need less, to notice the little growth spurts that they have and try to build on them, and know also that it might go back and forth, that it's not necessarily consistent. And so I really like this idea of becoming fluent in them, really. And in your book, you talk about this process, and the parents really determine, this is too much for my child right now. I'm going to go in and offer this kind of support. So that's what I really appreciated about it. It is very responsive to who they are and respectful, knowing that we're working towards something that's a better, again, quality of life for everyone involved in the family, but in a way that does feel really connected and in relationship.
I always like to give parents the example of, if your 3-year-old or 2-year-old says, I want a cookie before dinner, and you say no, and they escalate, and there's more no's and they have the full-blown tantrum. I'm a big believer of doing what's called hug hold instead of timeout. And so then after the hug hold, after you've calmed them down, and if they're verbal enough, you talk about their big feelings they had and how they felt about that you said no, because, in our family, we don't have cookies before dinner. So I tell parents, we're teaching them about their feelings and what they can do with those feelings in a different way, but we're not giving them the cookie before dinner. And it's in the same thing with sleep. I can be there to help you, but I'm not going to put you to sleep. I just want to say this just because I know that, Macall, you gave the example of a crib. I think that this is especially important to take an approach like this with children in beds, because when we take more of an extinction model, usually either the parent or the child, or often both, get into a huge power struggle, and patience is lost, and doors are slammed and locked, and all kinds of things happen. And then everybody feels horrible, and anxiety is raised, and we don't have a lot of success. And so I'm kind of biased. I'm sort of biased about certain groups of kids, for instance, newborns. I'm not a supporter of sleep training newborns. And then children who have been adopted later and not at birth, that we definitely have to go gradually and gently. Of course, children who are neurodivergent, have any special needs, and then children in beds. And then you take those kids and take the ones that are more intense and alert and live wire, and we really have to pay attention, be more available to our children to help support them as they learn.
So let's take another break, and then I want to explore different types of sleep avoiders. You kind of break down these kind of stereotype classic examples that all resonated with my personal experience and my child. So we'll be right back.
Max Bankman, I'm the new doctor.
Welcome aboard the Odyssey.
ABC Thursdays.
This ship is heaven. We're tending to our passengers' dreams. I'm in.
From 911 executive producer Ryan Murphy comes a splashy new drama on a luxury cruise ship with Joshua Jackson and Don Johnson.
It's your job to keep everyone alive.
She's in VFib. 1, 2, 3. Clear.
I have a pulse.
You're going to be okay.
Dr. Odyssey. Thursdays, 9/8 Central on ABC and stream on Hulu.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.
No one told us the truth about parenthood. Why? This is the podcast everyone needed before they had kids, because now that those little ones are here, there is a lot to unpack. I'm Rachel Shepardota, and I am your host for the podcast No One Told Us, where we tell the truth about parenting and let you in on all the stuff you really should have known about before having kids. I am the founder of Hey Sleepy Baby, but this podcast is so much more than sleep. We'll be diving into all the topics that you really care about and need to know while you do your best job raising those adorable, tiny humans. Our goal is to just make you feel less alone and less overwhelmed. There are so many things that no one tells us before becoming a parent, and I think that we should really pull back the curtain on becoming a first-time or second-time mom or dad to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. We'll have a little education, a little fun, and a whole lot of heart that goes into each and every episode. So join me and our amazing guests each week to hear us talk about what no one told us.
So in the book, you talk about the negotiator. I was like, oh, I know the negotiator. The talker, the mind racer, the holder, toucher, stroker, cuddler. So could you talk a little bit about these kids who I think are really good at like getting their needs met, or they're trying to get their needs met in a way that can really be triggering for us? Maybe pick one of those, the negotiator, the talker, the mind racer, the holder, toucher, stroker, cuddler, and give us an example about what that is and then how this approach would be applied to that child.
So these are 3-year-olds starting at 3 and up, but 3-year-olds, I tell people I get babies and 3-year-olds. I think we say more about 3-year-olds than any age group, because it's like their brain really comes online. They really start getting it about what can I have happen here? And bedtime is the perfect moment. So that part of the book is really part of like, you've got to understand who your kid is and what their particular challenge or MO is at bedtime and work on that, right? If you have a sensory sensitive child who gets activated by the bath, we don't do a bath at bedtime. Like, just set yourself up for success. So I like the mind racer one because that was my daughter, and we never had problems with bedtime resistance, but boy, she just couldn't calm that active brain down. And it would go fun places, ideas, questions, thoughts, ideas for the story she wanted to write tomorrow. But it would also, at times go into not great places. So a little rumination and spinning about something she saw, some social dynamic on the playground that wasn't great or whatever. And that would prolong bedtime just because she couldn't calm down. And you have to have strategies for that in terms of setting limits and really teaching them deep breathing, mindfulness, how to have activities where I say, put the thoughts away for the day. You actually say, these are all great. We're going to talk about them tomorrow. Let's write them on a slip of paper. We'll talk about them tomorrow. Kim probably has more of these, stretching, getting them in their body.
So often we're told, well, have your child tell you about their day at bedtime. And that's like the kind of worst thing to do for these sort of kids, And so if we know that, then let's talk about that at dinner instead. So then we have some time to slow down and think about more calming activities.
Yeah. So it really is. It helps you. So really what you're doing is you're trying to remove obstacles. At the same time, you're helping your child have some more skills. That goes also to things like fears and worries, right? We've got to help them understand how to drive that powerful brain. And all of that is really important to tackle at bedtime with limits. Like Kim said, you don't want to be processing the day after the lights go out. And in fact, I say with very verbal kids, conversation should end when the lights go out. I've had some parents where all they do is say, night night, night night, night night. They just don't put more fuel on the fire. So it's really about teaching these big spirit kids how to de-escalate from the day and go to sleep.
Yeah, I remember my kiddo loved to read books. And at one point we realized that like reading a book was like watching a movie for my kid because it was so activating and they just got fully immersed in it. And so we had to come up with a different strategy. So I love that you mentioned that this is a lifelong thing if you're a mind eraser. And so as you were talking about your daughter, I was like, how's that looking now? Yeah, I kind of want to understand what is our goal long-term for these kids, because I have to believe that there are many listeners who have kids for whom sleep is going to just be a challenge. It is still for my 20-year-old. It's something that requires so much intention. We're always working on sleep hygiene and it's always a struggle. And so what is the goal for starting these habits young, and what might we kind of expect or hope for our kids who have tricky relationships with sleep?
First of all, I want to address that it's always going to be a struggle. I disagree. I hate that there's this story going around that you're going to have to sleep train your child twice a year for like 10 years. I have not seen that in my practice of 30 years. Well, I'm going to give you an example of my two daughters where I had to figure out, I think we all need to figure out who we've been given in each little body, right? And not say, oh, the way I parent this one is the way I'll parent all of them, right? You could try that, but it doesn't always work as well, especially if you get one of these alert, intense live wire kids, because all bets are off on what you did with your quote unquote easier baby. With my older one, she napped way longer than the average. I had to wean her off at 5 years. She could pretty much nap anywhere. Like it was amazing, does she have her own sensitivities? Yes, but sleep was okay for her, And then I get my younger one who is like, Spitfire, who if I didn't have her in bed and asleep by 2:00 in her room, nobody else's, no pack and play in some other house, by 2:00, there would be no nap. Then mommy's cranky because the kids are cranky and it's all a bad day, And so, not that I'm a big camper, but I know there are a lot of parents who with these live wires want to go camping. I'm like, you can try it, but good luck, They just need to have it be more, their set place, their set routine. I couldn't rush the bedtime routine or the nap routine. She had to talk for 30 minutes, but all of these things where I didn't feel like, I guess I could say, oh, that's a struggle she's going to have her whole life. I felt like it was more, that's who she is. So how can I help create an environment, a schedule, a home that supports her being able to still sleep well? So it meant that, sorry guys, gotta leave the lunch or the playground. And they would be like, gosh, Kim, you're being so rigid. I'm like, yeah, but make my life better. And my kids like, and here she is now, 27. She likes her particular ways and her little things she still likes to sleep with and her kind of pillow and this, that, and the other. But she's figured it out. She knows herself. So just like for your 20-year-old, if she or he knows that they're particularly sensitive and, they have to go to bed around this time and they need these kind of sheets and not that kind of sheets. Well, that's okay. right? We all have to do that for ourselves. So I don't know. I'd like to not look at it as a problem.
With my daughter, and I tell people this all the time, they're like, but she just lays there for 30 minutes and talks and sings to herself. And I'm like, you may not be able to change that, but at least you don't have to be there for that, right? My daughter took forever to fall asleep. Once she was asleep, she slept through the night and great. My son would fall asleep right away and then be up every 45 minutes. So I had two different styles, but I think my daughter's probably still that way. She's not, and neither am I, one of those people who gets in bed and conks right out, just doesn't do it. I tell people to look around on an overnight flight and you'll see the different kinds of sleepers, right? Those people who can just lean back and do this like that. Like, who are those people? Like, I'm like eye mask, earphones, blanket, special pillow. I still can't sleep.
That is relatable. There's so much that we could talk about. I do want to squeeze in this one last question, then we'll start to wrap up, because I hear from a lot of parents who have those really early wakers, and you address that in the book too, like the kids who are like up and wake at 5 a.m. and the parents are like, oh my gosh, like what do I do here? So could you just spend a few minutes talking about early wakers and maybe share information that would be helpful for parents who have such children?
This is a hot topic, early rising. So I always tell parents, like, let's look at the typical causes of early rising, because it's not logical, right? Real quickly, the easiest time to learn to put yourself to sleep is bedtime for all of us, right? So they have to be going to bed early enough, not overtired, where the body secretes all these alerting hormones, which then will make it take them longer to go to sleep. They'll tend to wake up in the middle of the night and they'll tend to wake up too early. Like, that's not logical. Me, I'm like, I'll go to bed late. Hopefully I'll sleep in, which back in the day I could do, no longer. But it doesn't work like that for our children. So if they go to bed too late, they're more likely to be up at 5 a.m. And it's really the most important thing for parents to hear, because they will be like, oh, I'll keep them up later and then they'll sleep in. No, don't do that, right? So if they're nap deprived, like they didn't have a nap when they usually should have a nap, that will also create that overtiredness, right? Which will then lead to more difficulty going to sleep and staying asleep. If they're awake too long from their afternoon nap to their bedtime, because the bedtime is too late. And if they are put to sleep, or put down too drowsy, so they didn't really learn the skill of putting themselves to sleep at bedtime. And so they really can't apply it at 5 a.m., which is, I don't know about you, but for me, when I wake up at 5, boy, it's hard to go back to sleep, especially if I'm awake too long for my mind to start going, then all bets are off. So it's very similar for our children. And just like also a little side note, there are some medical conditions that also can cause early rising, such as sleep apnea. So that's also an important factor that often gets forgotten. And then I'd say lastly, sort of behaviorally, if you as a parent, which I get because it's hard for you and I to function at 5 a.m., our body is secreting hormones to keep us asleep. So we're feeling a little drugged and it's hard to be consistent. But if we have sort of allowed them to start their day at 5 a.m. and whatever, bring them out into the living room, turn on the TV, give them something to eat or a bottle, or bring them into your bed and everybody crashes back to sleep, they don't understand time. I mean, they don't really understand time for many years, our kids, So what's the difference between 3 a.m., 4 a.m., 5 a.m.? And I don't know how my parents are going to respond. So I'm going to give it a try. So once you've kind of looked at that other list and said, okay, I'm going to address these things. And then you go to say, now we're going to be really kind of strict about what we do at 5 a.m. Just know it will take a few weeks, right? Because of that, well, they'll give up, they'll change their mind. They've done it before, for it to be, the new norm, hopefully, that you wake up after 6. And also parents, if one of you is a morning bird, and I don't mean at 5 a.m., I mean like you wake rested and like to start your day at 6 a.m., then it's possible that you could have a morning bird child once they're sleeping through the night. And so I always say, can the morning bird parent be on duty?
Great. Thank you for answering that. And I just want to mention for listeners that you do address overtiredness, problems with the lead up to lights out, that the parent is that required part of the go to sleep. So you have these key things that tend to, well, you call them the big 4 sleep tankers, which I found that so helpful. So your book kind of helps people identify where the problems might be and then shows you how to apply this strategy for what's going on. Before we say goodbye, I just want to mention that I was so appreciative that at the end of the book, you have a chapter putting gas in your tank and you are talking about self-care, which is something I talk about all the time on this show, but that was so nice to see it in there. Why was it so important for you to include that in this book?
I think self-care, number one, is hard for moms for sure, moms and dads, but really moms more. And with these kids, it's even harder. It's even harder to go, well, I can't go out and blah, or I don't have time. And your tank just gets more and more and more empty. And we also know, I did some, I thought, kind of startling research on parental burnout among parents of these kids. And in the group that responded, it was 75% were in burnout. That's like shocking. Not surprising, really, but alarming, because burnout leads to a lot of really not great situations. So parents, moms essentially have to prioritize getting tiny little breaks where they can. Because if you're completely empty, you cannot think straight. You cannot problem solve anymore. And it's tricky and it's hard, but oh my goodness, it's just possibly one of the most critical things that these parents can do, I think.
Yeah, I just, right before we jumped on the call, I was writing in my newsletter about yesterday's daily episode, which was all about the parents are not all right. And this is parents of all children, not just neurodivergent children who are doing this intensive parenting and are just really struggling. And again, sleep is such a core issue. And we put so much pressure on ourselves to get it right and to figure it out quickly. And so I just appreciate the gentle approach and really doable and respectful approach that you guys share in your book. So before we say goodbye, where would you like listeners to learn more about your work? And again, the book, I'm just going to say, is called Why Won't You Sleep? A Game-Changing Approach for Exhausted Parents of Nonstop, Super Alert, Big Feeling Kids. So where would you like listeners to go?
That's a good question. They can order it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. There's several other places too, so probably lots of spots. But they can go to my website, littlelivewires.com. They can go to sleeplady.com as well for more information, and also Kim's other books, because you do have others.
Great. Listeners, as always, I will have an extensive show notes page for this episode, and I'll have links to all the resources, all of Kim's books, all the places you can connect with Kim and Macall. So thank you. I know we went really long. Unfortunately, that's not a rare situation for me, but I appreciate you sticking with me and really taking us inside the book and sharing all this with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. It's great.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at @tiltparenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Are you a parent in need of a laugh and a little escape? Look no further. Parenting is a Joke is the podcast you've been waiting for. Hey, I'm Ophira Eisenberg. I'm a stand-up comic and parent. And each week I chat with one of my top comedian pals who, just like you, are juggling careers, busy lives and schedules, and raising a family. You can expect candid stories, hilarious mishaps that happen on stage and at home, and just a lot of laughs. There's no expert advice here. Well, actually, sometimes a good idea does sneak its way in, but mostly just pure, relatable fun to remind you that we're all in this parenting adventure together. New episodes of Parenting is a Joke drop every Tuesday, so tune in, get ready to laugh, unwind, and maybe even feel a little bit better about your own parenting. Because sometimes that's exactly what your therapist, pediatrician, and bartender ordered. Subscribe now on your favorite podcast platform.